I've seen these Ohuhu markers all over social media, people using them for beautiful art or colouring in, but I was really intrigued to see what they'd be like for calligraphy. As a creative girly who's turned my passion into my job, sometimes it can be really hard just to do creativity for fun and not for work. And I found colouring in with these pens has really helped me switch off my brain a little bit, but just enjoy creativity. And the thing that I love the most is colour. I've been really enjoying how bright and bold they are. I've been working through a really lovely colouring book recently by a small business called Sam Jane Designs, and it's got lots of beautiful lettering in. And it got me thinking about whether I could actually use these pens for calligraphy. I absolutely love brush pens when it comes to doing calligraphy, but most of my brush pens are water-based. And to be honest with you, I have tried doing calligraphy with alcohol markers in the past, but I just haven't got on with them. But I think part of that is because I just haven't given myself the time, and I haven't had the right paper either. I always find that they can bleed quite a lot. The Ohuhu markers I have do have a brush tip on them, so I thought, why not? Let's give it a go and see what they're like for calligraphy. Before we dive into testing these Ohuhu markers, I will be totally transparent with you guys. The team at Ohuhu did ask to send me these pens, and after watching countless videos of people using them, I couldn't say no. However, everything I share in this video is completely my own opinion. I've not been asked to create this video, I just was intrigued to see if they'd be any good for calligraphy. Before we try using these pens for calligraphy, let's first take a closer look at the pens themselves. So they come in this really lovely carry container, which is super convenient for storing. I also think they need to be stored upright as well, so that really helps too. Let's take a look at the pens inside. There's so many gorgeous colours in this pen set. I love that there's quite a lot of pastel ones as well, so that would be really good for shadows when it comes to calligraphy. These pens are dual-ended alcohol markers. So at one end we have a broad tip. I'd say this is a pretty standard nib for most alcohol markers. They always seem to have a broad tip like this. I'm guessing because it's really good for colouring large areas. And then at the other end we have a brush tip. And this is what got me really excited for trying these for calligraphy. So when you're doing calligraphy, it's really good to have a flexible nib, and that is what this brush tip offers. This is quite a large nib when it comes to brush pens. This is how it compares to a Pentel brush sign pen and then a Tombow dual brush pen in the middle. So you can see that it's more similar in size to the Tombow dual brush pen. However, I've been using this for colouring in, and I definitely say it's not as flexible as the Tombow. So it'd be really interesting to try these for calligraphy and if they're any good for beginners. When I've tried alcohol markers in the past, the thing that I've always struggled with is the paper. I find that alcohol markers tend to bleed through a lot of paper, or the ink just spreads. As well as kindly sending me these Ohuhu Art Markers, they also sent me a mixed media pad. This is the 225 by 210, and the paper's quite thick, so it's 200 GSM paper, and it says it can be used for acrylic, watercolour or pen and pencil. So that's really great to hear that I can use it for a variety of products and with lots of different art supplies. So I'll be testing out how these pens work for calligraphy first on this kind of paper, but then I do have some other paper that I generally use for calligraphy, and I just want to see how that works as well. So in this notepad, you get a kind of protective sheet. So I think this is just to pop on the other side of the page to help with bleeding. So I assume that means that there might be a little bit of bleeding, but that's, I'd say, pretty standard when it comes to alcohol markers. So for this video, I'm only going to be using the brush tip. You can do certain types of calligraphy with a broad tip, but we're focusing on modern calligraphy today, which you generally use a flexible nib for. So first things first, let's just warm up with some calligraphy drills. Now, because this nib is quite large, I'm going to be doing my strokes and my letters quite large as well. If you prefer to do smaller letters, then this is definitely not the right pen because of how big the nib is. So already I can feel that the nib for this is quite easy to control on those upstrokes. It's not too stiff. There is a little bit of spreading though on the paper. Again, as someone who doesn't use alcohol markers very much, I think that is just standard for alcohol markers. And it does create a really lovely opaque colour. It'll be intriguing to see if you can easily see the joins between each stroke as well. So that's off to a good start. There is a nice amount of flex in it to create thick lines, but then it's not so flexible that the thin lines are really hard to do. I think the main thing I need to bear in mind when doing calligraphy is the slight spread of the ink. So let's write minimum, because this is my favourite word when it comes to doing calligraphy and testing out a marker. We're going to go for a little bit of a bouncy effect for this. And as I said, my letters are quite big just because of the size of the nib. So it moves over the paper really smoothly. I don't feel like the nib is catching at all. And if we just have a little close up, you can see that the ink is really flat and opaque. So you're not seeing any of those overlapping strokes. There is a little bit of bleeding on the edges here. So it's not necessarily as crisp as some other brush pens. One thing I'd love to test out is adding drop shadows to letters and seeing if the ink bleeds into each other. I tend to find that happens a lot with any water-based brush pen, no matter how long you leave it for, just because they start to react with each other. So I'm going to take quite a dark colour first. By the way, the pen I've just been using there is R5 Cherry Pink. So let's take this turquoise green, which is BG1. And we've got a mint blue, which is BG4. Let's go classic. Let's write hey. Ooh, that's a really dark green. So I haven't actually used every single pen in this pack yet. If you'd like me to do a swatch test of these, I think I did a swatch test of half of them, but not the other half. So if you would like to see that swatch test, then let me know in the comments below. So this line here has just gone a bit wobbly. I'm just going to touch it up. And actually that's quite good that I've touched it up. And again, you can't really see too much streakiness. Okay, now time to add the drop shadow. When I'm adding a drop shadow, I always think about where the light source is coming from. So let's say the light source is coming from here. It's shining on everything this side, which means the shadow will be on the opposite side. So we'll just add some shadow here. Okay, this is nice. And also where I'm overlapping the colours as well, just to make sure it's a bit more seamless. You can't really see that stroke either. So this is working so well. I do think it probably means that you can't blend with these brush pens. Like I said, I'm so used to using water-based brush pens where you can easily blend them and manipulate them in different ways. But I do wonder if blending these pens just won't work. You definitely wouldn't be able to blend on the paper, and because they're alcohol-based, I don't think you'd be able to use water. But I'm intrigued to see if you can blend... Oh, drop my pen. I'm intrigued to see if you can blend nib to nib. So I'm just gonna, I hope I don't ruin this. We're just gonna give this a little colour. For anyone out there who's like obsessed with alcohol markers and use these all the time, I'm sorry if I've just done something terribly wrong. Let's just do the letter M. Ooh, okay. Oh, that's nice. It's quite pigmented. I like how it's adding like a little stripe in there, and I can see that ink has come off so easily. I didn't put too much on, but I really like the effect of that. And then I guess I can just do a little scribble and it's back to good as new. Let's see what it's like blending two kind of contrasting colors. So I'm going to take this mint green light, which is G4, and then this vivid reddish purple, which is RP1. Actually, do I want that? No. We're going to go for RP6, which is vivid pink. Okay, so we're going to colour in the pink one because it's a lighter nib. And let's just do an uppercase A for this. So the colours are a little bit murky, but that could just be the two colours I've picked. I'd say, yeah, so here where I'm trying to blend them together, it's not blending as easily. I do like this kind of like shadowy contrast it adds. So it's more kind of streaking the darker colour through rather than blending them. And actually that creates a really nice depth to it. So if you wanted to add a bit of shading, that does work nicely. I do really like that. Oh, I've just seen that there is a colour blender in here. So I'm guessing that means you can blend the colours together. Let's give that a go. I wonder if you can do it on paper. Let's take this R10 in pastel pink. And then this is the P for lavender. We will do a letter H. So you can use blending pens in different ways. You can add the ink to the nib itself, and that means you could add quite a lot of different colours. Or you can use it to kind of blur the inks together, which is how I'm going to test it here. So if I just put a little streak of that lavender and then come in with the blending. So it's saturating the paper quite a lot, which is making the ink bleed a little. So I would say for kind of really controlled calligraphy, it's probably not the best tool for blending. You can see it's blended out a little bit, and I guess for things like colouring in where you've got a bit more space to work with, this could be really nice. But as you can see, there is quite a lot of spread where I have been blending that. So you'd have to try and thicken up all areas. So that's not worked as well as I hoped. Let's see what it's like adding a few different colours onto the nib. So we're going to go for RP6. Let's do this lavender as well. How about this India blue? So this is B64. And let's get a yellow in there. So this is YR2 in marigold. Ooh. Okay, let's see. Firstly, if I ruin the nib and if this works. Get some fresh paper. Okay, so you can see it's bled through the page a little bit here, but this sheet has protected it. So I think this is really important to use. I've also noticed with this notepad, actually, it's got perforated edges. So that's good if you just want to take any pages out. Ooh. Okay. Oh, I wish I was filming my like face reaction now, because I am like gobsmacked. So when I do this kind of thing with water-based pens, because they're water-based, they do tend to blend more easily together and get quite murky. But I love how you can see all the individual colours. That is so cool. So rather than actually blending, you can just create like a really lovely, almost rainbow effect. And it does seem that the ink is coming off this nib. I think where I put it quite far down, it's just not able to rub off a little bit, but I guess you could get a bit of tissue and wipe that. It's not the same as what I'm used to when it comes to blending, but I like this. Like, that's so pretty. Oh my goodness. I love it. I love it. So next, I just wanted to try layering. So putting a lighter colour down and then adding a darker colour on top. So let's try this mauve shadow, which is R11. And then we will also take P5, which is aubergine. So I'm a very colourful calligrapher. I like adding shadows and extra details to my calligraphy. If it's possible to layer and add extra elements and details without the ink blending, then that is a bit of a game changer. So this is the bit I always struggle with. What are we going to write? Let's write Ohuhu. So interestingly, on these slightly lighter shades, you can see a bit of a crossover of the stroke, although it seems to be fading. I have found that when I've done colouring, actually, initially you can see the strokes and then they kind of blend into each other and creates quite a flat effect, which I really like. So we got a hoo-hoo. Let's just add a little bit of kind of bubble effect. Bubble effect? I'm not sure if this is a bubble effect. I just like adding little bits of detail like this. So it is bleeding a little bit. I wonder if I do need to let it dry for longer. But it's definitely sitting on top nicely. And it's not like bleeding or merging or changing the colour of the pen. If we look close up, you can see there is a little bit of bleeding. I'm intrigued to see what would happen if you left the ink a little bit longer. So I'm just going to draw another letter to the side and then we'll come back to that. While that's drying, I'm just going to move this to the side and we're going to test out some other paper just to see how they work with different types of paper that I tend to use for calligraphy. First up, I have a Rhodia pad. I always recommend these for beginners for practicing because the paper is nice and thin if you want to trace over anything, and it's really smooth, so it doesn't fray nibs, but also, and most ink doesn't tend to bleed. But let's see if that's the same for alcohol markers. So I'm just going to take this for a little bit of protection. For this, I'm going to use the Brilliant Blue, which is PB2. Okay. That seems to be working quite nicely. There is a tiny bit of spread, but actually, I'm quite impressed with that. I think when it comes to having a calligraphy pen, it's really important that you can use it on kind of practice paper as well as final paper, because it helps to get that practice in before you start using lots of expensive paper. Let's try another colour. Go for this coral pink, which is R1. This is going on really smoothly. I'm actually quite impressed with this. I fully expected this to spread absolutely everywhere, but it's working quite nice. So you can see it has bled through a lot. So if you are using it on practice paper like this, it is really handy to have this kind of plastic sheet thing just to protect it. Obviously that can add a little extra layer of faff, but overall I think that's nice. The pen still glides lovely and smoothly on this paper too, and you can see that I can easily make that nice contrast between thick and thin lines. I'm liking this. Okay, we might have to start using alcohol markers more because these are nice. The one thing I would say is they do smell quite strong, but in terms of large brush pens, this is probably one of the easiest ones to control. Let's get a couple of other large brush pens and just show you the difference. So if we start with the Ohuhu Art Marker, I'm just going to do the letter M. It's my favourite letter and I think it shows you the contrast between the strokes, and I'm just going to do it in exactly the same way each time. I'm not going to change how much pressure compared to each pen. So that is the Ohuhu marker. I've then got a Royal Talens Ecoline marker in 507. You can see the nib for this is a little bit smaller than the Ohuhu marker. However, I do find that the Ecoline is quite flexible. So let's see what the difference is. So I'm using the same amount of pressure, and you can see already that I've done a much thicker downstroke. I'm not adding any more pressure compared to the Ohuhu marker, and there is quite a big contrast. You can also see, because the Eco line is water-based, it creates a bit more texture where there's more pressure and less pressure, and you can see the overlap of the strokes. Whereas the Ohuhu marker, it's very flat in colour. So if you want your calligraphy to be quite flat and bold in colour, then I'd say the Ohuhus work really well. If you want a bit more texture and a bit more of a watercolour feel, then you're not going to get that with the Ohuhu markers. And finally, I've just got a Tombow ABT dual brush pen. The nibs on these are very similar in size. I'd say the Tombow is a little bit longer, and I'm pretty sure the Tombow is more flexible, but let's give it a go. So this one is a little bit dried and frayed. That is a downside for Tombows, is they tend to fray. It'll be interesting to see how easily these Ohuhu markers fray. Okay, let's try that again. I've just gone for a colour that I don't normally use. I'm just going to do the same pressure again. So I'd say that you're creating quite similar thickness in terms of thick and thin lines with the Tombow. Because of the ink spread on the Ohuhu, it does mean that the thin lines do end up thickening up a little bit compared to the Tombow. So you can see that that is a little bit more crisp. However, because the nib is quite flexible, you can see there's a lot of bend in here. It does mean that the Tombow can be quite hard to control on those kind of curved shapes. Whereas for the Ohuhu markers, they're not as flexible, so it is easier to make that curve. You just need to bear in mind some of the bleeding that you get. I've just left this to dry for a little bit, so let's try that again. I think I used aubergine. We'll just go in and add these details again. There is a little bit of spread, but I'd say it's not spreading as much. So I think the trick with layering is to let the ink dry fully before you go in with some extra. So you can see here that there's definitely a bit of spreading. I think just because the lavender colour hadn't dried properly. But here the lines are a little bit more crisp. Let's just go to town and add a little drop shadow onto this too. So this is the warm grey. Because I've gone quite light with that letter, you can see there's a little bit of overlapping. So I probably should have gone a bit darker for the letter to do any sort of drop shadows like this. The other type of paper I want to try out with these pens is Bristol board. Lots of different brands do Bristol board. I have the Winsor & Newton one here, and it's essentially an extra smooth, quite thick card, and it's great for creating final pieces. I'm just going to slide this underneath to make sure it doesn't go on my background. And let's just write a word. I just want to see if this works. So that goes on really nice and smoothly actually, and I don't think there's any bleeding at all. It's kind of making it even more pigmented. And I love how flat the colour looks as well. Okay. So there's not really any bleeding at all on that actually. Oh, there's a tiny bit, but that is minimal. That looks so nice on Bristol board. Just wanted to add in a little shadow and see how they kind of react next to each other. Okay, that's a winner for me. It works on the Rhodia pad, so great for practicing, and it works on this dot paper. I'd love to try it out on watercolour paper, but I've just realised I've totally run out of that. So if you want me to do another video at some point, testing out these pens on watercolour paper, and maybe seeing if we can get them blending a little bit more, then let me know in the comments below. After filming this video, I got quite inspired to play with these pens a little bit further. And I ended up creating this really fun pink and red contrasting calligraphy piece for my Instagram to celebrate Galentine's Day. And I think it turned out so nicely. I absolutely love how opaque the colours are. and how flat they look as well. I'm so used to working with water-based brush pens that kind of show a little bit of texture and changing colour depending on how much pressure you are applying. So it's quite nice to work with a pen and an ink that creates this quite flat bold colour, but then you can layer it up with different effects such as detailing and drop shadows. Okay, so I think it's safe to say that you can do calligraphy with these pens, and I'm actually quite obsessed with how flat the colour looks. So if that's a vibe you're going for with your calligraphy, then these could be really good. I will say if you are a total beginner when it comes to calligraphy, they are definitely not the pens I would start with. Although the nib isn't too flexible, because it's quite large, you do have to get used to writing quite big letters. And also on some paper, it does tend to bleed. And the last thing you want when learning calligraphy is worrying about ink bleeding here, there, and everywhere. However, if you've been doing calligraphy for a while and you're looking to introduce more bold, bright colours to your calligraphy, then I really recommend trying out these Ohuhu markers. It's a little bit disappointing these don't seem to blend as easily, but I may be missing a trick with these because alcohol pens are a little bit new to me. So let me know in the comments below if you have any tips or tricks on how to blend these pens, because I love blending. Although I have to say that kind of rainbow blend mix I did with the clear blending pen, that was delightful. Honestly, I'm super excited to try these out a little bit more, and it's really good to know that I can use it on my Bristol board. I think that's the thing that's always put me off alcohol markers in the past, is they've always seemed to just bleed everywhere. And obviously now I have that clear plastic backing that I can put under paper, making it less messy, which is really good for a chaotic, creative girly like me. The one thing I will say is because it's an alcohol-based pen, it does have a little bit of a smell, so I don't think it's a good idea to use them for daily practice. But if you are creating a final piece where you wanted the colours to really stand out and be bold, and it's quite a large piece as well, then I would really recommend these pens. And it's actually honestly got me wondering whether I should even create a calligraphy colouring book with these. Or even like, I guess kind of like a calligraphy colouring book, but it's more like a traceable template. I don't know what I'm trying to get out there. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, then please do give it a big thumbs up because that hugely helps me. If there's any other pens you'd like me to test out or any other weird and wonderful art materials you'd like me to try, then do let me know, because I'm always on the hunt for trying out new things and sharing it with you guys to see if they're any good. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys soon. Bye!